In this video, I'm going to be covering every single Pokemon type in Pokemon GO and talking about what the absolute best Pokemon are within each of those types. Now, if you want to know what Pokemon you should invest into in the year 2024, then this video will definitely help you. Alright, so with that said, let's get right into it. Alright, how's it going everyone? It's me, it's Jinsula. I hope you're having a good day and welcome to today's Pokemon GO video. Alright, so in this video, I'm going to be listing every single Pokemon type and talking about what the top 6 DPS Pokemon are within each of those types. This is a very important video because I really do think that if you invest into every single one of these Pokemon, you're going to get really far in Pokemon GO. Now keep in mind that these are the top 6 DPS of every single type. I'm not going to be factoring in TDO or PvP usefulness, but I'm going to be covering what Pokemon deal the most DPS. That's damage per second. So if you want the top damage dealers, this video is going to be extremely helpful. You should also keep in mind that within each of the typings, there's going to be multiple legendaries, ultra beasts, and mega evolutions, and you do not necessarily have to invest into every single one of them. I would just pick and choose which ones you are able to invest into right now, and definitely power up those specific Pokemon. So let's start this off with the bug typing. Now, within the bug typing, the top 6 DPS is going to include Mega Pinsir, Pheromosa, Volcarona, Mega Beedrill, Mega Scizor, and Shadow Pinsir. Now, in terms of the absolute best Pokemon, Mega Pinsir, you will want to have the moves Bug Bite and X Scissor, and then with Pheromosa, you will want Bug Bite and Bug Buzz, Volcarona, Bug Bite and Bug Buzz, Mega Beedrill with Bug Bite and X Scissor, and then Mega Scizor with Fury Cutter and X Scissor, and then of course Shadow Pinsir with Bug Bite and X Scissor. All of these Pokemon are going to deal the absolute best bug type DPS, and you will definitely want to invest into them. I highly suggest you get yourself a Mega Pinsir and a bunch of Pheromosas in your collection. If you have that, you're going to have yourself the perfect bug type team. Now, let's say you cannot get any of these Pokemon, but you have access to regular Pinsir and regular Vigavolt. Both of those Pokemon are going to be your best budget counters, so you should definitely invest into those if you do not have any of the top 6 bug types. Alright, next up, let's move on to the dark typing, and we're going to see a lot of Tyranitar on this list. At the very top, we have Mega Tyranitar, then we have Shadow Tyranitar, then Mega Houndoom, then Hydreigon, and regular Tyranitar, and Shadow Weavile. Now, out of all of these Pokemon, you will of course want to run dark type attacks, and with all the different versions of Tyranitar, you will want to have Bite and Brutal Swing. The ideal team is going to be a Mega Tyranitar with 6 Shadow Tyranitars, which is going to be extremely difficult to get. So the alternative is to get yourself 5 Hydreigons with Bite and Brutal Swing, and you're going to deal a lot of dark type DPS. Next up, we got the Dragon typing, and the number 1 Pokemon is going to be incredibly obvious. That's going to be Mega Rayquaza. Now, also included is Mega Garchomp, Shadow Salamence, Mega Salamence, Shadow Garchomp, and Shadow Dragonite. All 6 of these Pokemon are going to deal the most Dragon-type DPS, but of course, they all pale in comparison to Mega Rayquaza, so that should be your number 1 priority when it comes to Dragon-type DPS. Now, if you do not have any of these Pokemon, you can go with regular Salamence or regular Garchomp. Just make sure you run with Dragon Tail and Outrage on both of those Pokemon, and you're going to be good to go. The ideal team is going to be Mega Rayquaza with a full team of Shadow Salamence. But if you cannot get yourself Shadow Salamence, you could opt to go with regular Salamence instead. Alright, next up, let's talk about the electric typing. The top 6 is going to include Shadow Raikou, Xurkitree, Mega Manectric, Zekrom, Shadow Electivire, and Shadow Zapdos. Now, out of these 6, Shadow Raikou is going to be the absolute best, but it's going to be incredibly difficult to get if you did not battle Giovanni when this Pokemon was out. You can't trade for it, you can't obtain it right now, so the alternative is of course going to be Xurkitree. That Ultra Beast does make frequent appearances in Pokemon GO, and when it does, you should definitely farm it up. Zekrom is also another common Pokemon, but make sure you run Zekrom with Charge Beam and Fusion Bolt. That's going to output the most electric type DPS if you do not have Xurkitree, Mega Manectric, or Shadow Raikou. But in terms of budget counters, both regular Electivire and Magnezone are going to hold out, mainly because they have access to Wild Charge, which is a very powerful electric type charge attack. Alright, next up, let's talk about the top fairy types. At number 1, we have Mega Gardevoir. At number 2, we have Shadow Gardevoir. At number 3, we actually have Mega Alakazam. I'll talk about that in a moment. And then we got Shadow Granbull, then Xerneas, as well as Togekiss. Now, the reason why Mega Alakazam is considered a top DPS fairy type is because it by itself is a top DPS Pokemon, and it also has access to Dazzling Gleam. That actually makes it a top fairy type raid attacker, believe it or not. But of course, it does pale in comparison to Mega Gardevoir, so if you have access to that, then you should definitely choose that Pokemon instead. Alright, moving right along, let's talk about the top fighting types. At number 1, we have Mega Blaziken with Counter and Focus Blast, then we have Terrakion, then Shadow Machamp, then Keldeo, Mega Alakazam makes another appearance, and then we got Shadow Hariyama. Now, out of the 6, I obviously recommend Terrakion. That is going to be the absolute best fighting type raid attacker. It does an incredible amount of damage with Double Kick and Sacred Sword. Both of those moves are going to make this Pokemon a top raid attacker when it comes to fighting types, and you should not ignore it if you have them. Alright, next up, let's talk about the top fire types. And once again, we have Mega Blaziken at the very top. This Pokemon is incredibly versatile because you could use it as a top fighting type, or you could use it as a top fire type. And then alongside it, we have Mega Charizard Y, then Reshiram, then Shadow Blaziken, and then Mega Charizard X, and then Shadow Chandelure. All these Pokemon are incredible when it comes to Fire-type DPS, and if you happen to have any of them, then you should definitely invest into them. When it comes to Reshiram, make sure you're running with Fusion Flare, because that's what's going to make it extremely powerful. Of course, when it comes to budget counters, we also have Volcarona and Darmanitan. Darmanitan is probably the most common Pokemon out of all the Pokemon on this list. And then next up, let's talk about the top flying types. At the very top, we of course have Mega Rayquaza with Air Slash and Dragon Ascend. Then we actually have regular Rayquaza with Air Slash and Dragon Ascend, then Shadow Moltres, Yveltal, Shadow Star Raptor, and then Mega Pidgeot. There's a lot of Mega Evolutions and Legendaries on this list, so it's going to be incredibly difficult to get the top flying types. Fortunately, you do not always need flying type damage, so you do not necessarily have to worry about investing into too many of these Pokemon. There are some really decent budget counters as well that are pretty common. Regular Star Raptor with Wing Attack and Brave Bird is going to hold its own, as well as Braviary with Air Slash and Brave Bird. Alright, next let's talk about the top ghost types. We of course have Mega Gengar at the very top, then Mega Banette, then Shadow Chandelure, then Shadow Gengar, then Mewtwo with Shadow Ball, and then Giratina Origin Form. If you top load your team with a bunch of Gengars, you're always going to do okay, but if you happen to have yourself a Giratina Origin Form or a bunch of Shadow Mewtwo with Shadow Ball, then that's going to be even better. Alright, next up let's talk about the top grass types. At the very top we have Mega Sceptile, then we got Kartana, then Mega Venusaur, and then Skyform Shaman, then Shadow Sceptile, and then Zarude. I think this list is pretty straightforward. Have a team of Mega Sceptile with a bunch of Kartanas, and then you're going to have yourself the top damage output when it comes to grass type damage. Next up, let's move on to ground types. At the very top, we of course have Primal Groudon. This is one of the most powerful Pokemon in the game, much like Mega Rayquaza, and when it comes to ground types, it's going to be number 1 by a huge margin. And then right behind it, we have Mega Garchomp, then Shadow Garchomp, then Shadow Exeggutor, then Shadow Mamoswine, and then Shadow Rhyperior. Yeah, you can see that the ground types are just full of Shadow Pokemon. So if you do not have any of these Pokemon, then you could just go with regular Garchomp with ground type attacks, or regular Exeggutor with ground type attacks as well. As long as the Mega Evolution that you're using is Primal Groudon, you're going to be okay. You're going to deal so much ground type damage with just that one Pokemon, so you do not necessarily have to worry about what other ground types you bring. Alright, next up, let's go over the ice types. Now, at the very top, it's going to be Shadow Mamoswine, then we have Shadow Weavile, then Baxcalibur, then Galarian Darmanitan, then regular Mamoswine, and then at the very end, we of course have our first Mega Evolution, which is Mega Glalie. Shadow Mamoswine has and will continue to be the absolute best ice type, mainly because Powder Snow and Avalanche is a super powerful ice type move combination. If you happen to have yourself a bunch of Shadow Mamoswine, they're definitely worth investing into because there's plenty of raid bosses that are weak against ice types. Alright, next let's talk about the best poison types. At number 1, we have Mega Beedrill with Poison Jab and Sludge Bomb, then we have Mega Gengar with Hex and Sludge Bomb, then Nihilego, then Shadow Gengar, then Shadow Victreebel, and then Shadow Vileplume. Again, there's a lot of Shadow Pokemon in this list, so if you want better alternatives that are not Shadow or Legendaries, then you can go with Roserade with Poison Jab and Sludge Bomb, or Overquill with Poison Jab and Sludge Bomb. The best poison type team that you can run with is going to be Mega Beedrill with 5 Nihilego. So anytime Nihilego is back in 5-star raids, you should definitely farm it up because it's going to be your best anti-fairy Pokemon that you could use. Next up, let's talk about psychic types. These are of course some of the most powerful Pokemon in the game, but you will want to make sure you invest into the right ones. At number 1, it's going to be incredibly obvious. That's going to be Shadow Mewtwo. If you have a Shadow Mewtwo with Confusion and Psystrike, congratulations, you have the absolute best psychic type that you could ever have. And then also in the top psychic types, we have Mega Alakazam, then regular Mewtwo, then Mega Latios, then Mega Gardevoir, and then Shadow Latios. There's a lot of Shadows and Legendaries and Mega Evolutions on this list, and it totally makes sense because when it comes to psychic types, there's just so many options you can go with. Now, if you do not have any of these Pokemon, then Metagross with psychic type attacks and regular Alakazam are going to hold their own, so you can invest into those. Alright, next let's talk about the top rock types. So at number 1, we have Shadow Rampardos, then we have Mega Diancie, then Shadow Rhyperior, then Mega Tyranitar, then Mega Aerodactyl, and then regular Rampardos. Among all the rock types, I would say that Rampardos is the one you should invest into. It's incredibly easy to get because there's plenty of ways you can get Granados, and of course, it's going to deal an insane amount of DPS. And if you can get yourself a high IV Shadow Rampardos, that is definitely one you should invest into. And then when it comes to Mega Evolutions, Mega Diancie is of course going to be incredibly difficult, but Mega Tyranitar with Smackdown and Stone Edge is going to be a much better alternative. Alright, next let's talk about steel types. So at number 1, we of course have Shadow Metagross. This is going to be the absolute best steel type in the game by far. And then at number 2, we have regular Metagross. And then at number 3, we have Shadow Exeggutor. Then at number 4, we have regular Dialga. And at number 5, we have Mega Aggron. And then at number 6, we have Mega Scizor. Now, all of these Pokemon deal an incredible amount of steel type DPS, but none of them compare to Shadow Metagross. So that is definitely one you should prioritize if you have it. And if you don't, then invest into regular Metagross as long as you have Bullet Punch and Meteor Mash. Alright, and finally, let's talk about the best water types. And this is going to be the last type that I cover. Yeah, I'm going to be skipping over normal types because really, when are you ever going to use normal type Pokemon? But when it comes to water types, we have Primal Kyogre at the very top, then we have Mega Swampert, then Mega Blastoise, then Shadow Swampert, then Mega Gyarados, and then regular Kyogre. Yeah, there's a lot of Mega Evolutions in the top water types, but even among all of them, Primal Kyogre is going to be the absolute best by a wide margin. Kind of like how Primal Groudon is with ground types and Mega Rayquaza with dragon types, Primal Kyogre is going to be insanely good. If you're running Waterfall and Origin Pulse, you're going to deal the absolute most DPS when it comes to water type damage, so that is one you should definitely prioritize. Now, if you do not have any of these Pokemon, then you could invest into Greninja with Water Shuriken and Hydro Cannon, or actually Kingler with Bubble and Crabhammer. That Pokemon is incredibly underrated and not a lot of people are aware that it is a top water type Pokemon, but that is definitely one you could invest into if you still do not have yourself a good Kyogre or a bunch of Shadow Pokemon or Mega Evolutions. So yeah, there you have it. These were the top Pokemon of every single type, and I really do think that if you invest into these Pokemon, you're going to do extremely well within Pokemon Go. These are definitely Pokemon you should prioritize in the year 2024. Make sure you trade for the ones you still do not have, make sure you raid every single one that appears in 5-star raids, and also make sure you do Team Go Rocket battles because some of these Shadow Pokemon are some of the best that you will get in a very long time. And yeah, with that said, that's going to be it for this video. Now, if there is a particular Pokemon that you feel should have been mentioned in this video, definitely say what that Pokemon is and give me your reasoning for why you think it should be considered a top Pokemon of its typing. That's going to be a very interesting discussion because all of these Pokemon were based on the top DPS, but of course I did not factor in TDO or PvP, so this list is definitely going to vary from player to player. Yeah, let's have that great discussion down below. And if you ended up enjoying this video and found it to be informative, make sure you hit that thumbs up button and subscribe if it's your first time here, and don't forget that little bell so you can stay up to date on whenever I upload videos. Now I want to give a quick shout out to all the members of my Patreon family. You make this channel content possible. If you want to support my channel in any way, big or small, then make sure you go and check out the links in the description below. For every single member of my Patreon family, they get a permanent spot on my in-game friends list. So if you want to interact with with me in some way within Pokemon Go, like with remote raids or the friendship system, then make sure you go and check out my Patreon. Also, if you want to support my channel without spending any money, you could always do so by following me on social media. My handle is @Jinsula, and I'm on the platforms that you see on your screen, right here. Alright, and that's going to be it. I'm Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, have yourself a great new year, and I'll catch you all later.